Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's a great pleasure to welcome to today's program, Jake Papa, who's Senior VP of Enterprise Sales at Emerge. And today we're going to talk about supply chain's most profitable four-letter word, data. So there's certainly a lot of data in supply chain logistics. And, some companies drown in it, while others find a way to convert data into business value. And, one area where data plays a critical role is in transportation procurement. So how does data connect to procurement, connect to profitability? Well, that's the key question we're going to discuss in today's episode. And it's great to have Jake on the program to share his insights and advice on this topic, as well as his perspective on the current state of the transportation market. So Jake, welcome to the program.
Really appreciate it, Adrian. Thanks for having me on today.
So Jake, you're a first-time guest here on Talking Logistics, and like I always do at the start of these programs, whenever I bring someone new, I'm always curious how they got involved with this industry. So maybe before we dive into the topic, briefly tell us a little bit about your career path, how and why you got involved with supply chain, logistics, transportation, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Emerge.
Yeah, definitely. So I moved out to Arizona in 2007, actually to join ASU. So went to college out here. And then right after I graduated, I was introduced to Andrew and Michael Leto at Global Trans. That was right when they actually got their Series A fundraising and started to build their truckload department out. So went into interview, had about a 7-minute interview. I was actually with Michael and got a job that day and started with him about 2 weeks later. So started with Global Trans, filled pretty much every role you could think of in the brokerage space, started inside sales, jumped over to pricing, did a little bit on the intermodal side of the business, then back into enterprise sales. Right about 2013, 2014 is when we started our secondary company, 10-4 Systems. So as we were scaling that out, as well as Global Trans, I jumped over to 10-4 and helped run sales and operations over there for several years until 2017, when we stepped away from both those ventures and started Emerge, where I'm currently at today.
Wow. Well, I used to live out in Arizona, so I know the ASU environment and Tempe. I used to live right there in Tempe, and ASU, a great school, and particularly with strength in supply chain logistics. But it seems like you've had a great journey so far in multiple roles there, different ventures leading up to your current role there at Emerge. So let's start now. I mean, you've obviously been in transportation logistics, since coming out of ASU. So you've been able to see some of the ups and downs and cyclical nature of this industry. So So let's start by getting your perspective on a topic that is generating a lot of buzz and debate at the moment. And it's certainly a topic where data, comes into play. And that is, what is the current state of the US freight market? I mean, is it heading to a recession or not? I mean, I think if you go on LinkedIn, you'll see multiple back and forth between different parties kind of arguing one point or another. But since you've got a pulse on this as well, what's your take?
Yeah, recession's a tough word, isn't it? So that might be a little bit over the top of what's actually happening, but we are starting to see rates go down, especially in the spot market. The last 90 days or so, we've seen a pretty consistent trend on that piece of the business. Also seen on the contract side, tender acceptance fairly high, especially high compared to what it's been over the COVID years. So recession, I'm not going to comment if that's true or false. We're definitely seeing some change, and it's been volatile for a long time. So kind of level setting the playing field here and potentially getting back down to more reasonable rates is kind of what we're seeing on our end. And with that, you start to see shippers acting differently, going to market differently, approaching procurement differently. So extremely excited kind of where the market's going. But from a recession standpoint, I won't put my name behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think the word recession is kind of a very strong, and it's got a very specific definition around it. And I think it could be lead people into lose focus into kind of the reality of what's important or not. But I think what's important for sure is the data, right? Keeping a pulse in that market, because we all know that the market is cyclical. There's going to be ups and downs. What we don't know is how long each of these cycles last, and what's going to be the factors necessarily that's going to trigger an inflection point and so forth. But I think if you do have, and I think that's one of the beauties of today's environment, is if you do have more real-time visibility to what's happening out there, you're able to be a little bit more predictive. You're able to be a little bit more proactive in terms of what actions to take. So let's talk now in terms of how this translates into procurement. I mean, so in light of what you're seeing in terms of how these current market trends and predictions, I mean, how are they influencing the way companies are approaching their transportation procurement plans and strategies?
Definitely. So, if you think of it from the annual procurement cycle, generally, shippers will go to bid in Q4 for a Q1 release of their annual RFP. Obviously, with the rates changing so dramatically here in Q1 and into early Q2, we're starting to see a lot of shippers go to market with more mini bids, seasonal bids. As we're approaching summer months here, maybe potentially going out for a 6-month bid or a 3-month bid rather than their traditional annual bid. So we're seeing the rate of RFPs or the rate of mini bids go up pretty dramatically as shippers try to get the cheaper pricing, because if they're locked into an annual rate here from something that was bid out in Q4 of last year, it's a pretty different, dramatically different market at this current state. So through our platform, and it being a procurement platform for both those mini bids and annual bids, we've seen a dramatic uptick in the number of events shippers are running. So over the last 90 days, we've had 100 plus different events run through our platform, and we still continue to see that grow here today.
So, and this is another topic of conversation that's been happening for a while, right? Is the, once a year strategic procurement bid dead, right? You set it and forget it type of thing. And I think the general consensus is that, you can't just set it and forget it anymore, because it is, very cyclical, in nature. But I think in some ways, I think that's the wrong question. I think the right question is, are strategic partnerships between shippers and carriers still important? And I think that question, even though the frequency of the bids may change, strategic partnerships and having strong partnerships in place is still important. Do you agree?
Oh, most definitely, most definitely. Whether that's from a one-way or a dedicated standpoint, having that relationship with the asset-based carriers and strategic brokerages are critical for these shippers. And generally what we see as rates start to fluctuate like this is, the past 2 years, a lot of shippers have gone and added more people to their network. So, if they traditionally had, let's say 50 carriers and brokers in their network, they might've went up to 75 or 80 to go get capacity. Now they're starting to tone that back down and get back to more realistic expectations for how large their network needs to be, and keeping those strategic partners moving forward with them. So from an annual standpoint, from a seasonal standpoint, of course, you'll always need those strategic relationships, but the frequency of the bidding or the frequency of going out to market for new rates is something that we see continuously happening.
Now, I think, from a shipper standpoint, and, kind of doing, shorter term bids kind of makes sense in a very volatile environment, particularly if, rates start coming down and things start softening, you're able to capture some of those, freight saving. In theory, from a carrier's perspective, it should be positive for them as well. If you agree that then when things get tighter, right, they'll be able to capture higher rates in the future. They're not locked into these softer rates, right? So then from a shipper standpoint, then what ends up happening historically is then you get the higher tender rejection rates.
Correct.
Because so in theory this going out to bid on a more frequent basis should be beneficial both in a quote unquote shippers market as well as a carriers market. Do you agree?
Yeah. So if you think from a carrier or brokerage standpoint specifically, it takes a lot of the risk out of it. So, if you're going to market for an annual bid on potentially lanes you're not, familiar with running, or that you don't have the consistency in, you might make money 9 months of the year, you might lose money 3 months of the year, especially in the brokerage standpoint. So running a 6-month bid or 3-month bid takes a lot of that vibration out of it, which is, in theory could allow these brokers and carrier partners to come in more aggressively because they can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. And I think, I think when technology comes in, from my standpoint, is historically, doing a bid was a very time consuming, costly process, if you will, right? Gathering the data, sending out the bids, which most cases were sending out a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and then coming back and, aggregating all those spreadsheets. But the environment, thanks to technology, that environment now, the cost and the effort and the ability to do these mini bids through technology has been alleviated or been enabled through technology, right?
Yeah, definitely. Especially with platforms like ours and others that are out there, you can duplicate a bid on a monthly cycle or even a weekly cycle in a few clicks. So essentially you just copy the event, update the new lanes and volumes tied to those events, push it to your network and start collecting rates in, 5 to 7 clicks. So that's really where we've seen the power of that come through, is the ability to reproduce those and kind of go to market much quicker, as well as with things like scenario building and optimization and low cost solves and different ways that you can actually kind of automate the awarding process to make it to where it's, once again, a few clicks rather than needing to export a bunch of Excels and run different formulas to try and get those rates. So yeah, we see a lot of that happening through platforms like ours and some others that are out there.
Great, great. So linking back to the title of this episode, I mean, how does data connect to procurement, connect to profitability?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, the data side of it, I really look at data three different ways. There's the shipper's historical data, their volumes, their rates that they've paid in the past that they can start to utilize to do things like benchmarking. There's also third-party data sources they can go out and either purchase or partner with in order to start to look at that. And then you've got your current rates. So when you run a procurement event, you see kind of the current market of where your network of carrier and broker partners are at, and you can obviously negotiate with them from there. But you kind of see those three different data points to be able to make your buying decisions. So where that equals to profitability kind of depends on what scope you're looking through. On the shipper side of things right now, I think it gives them more flexibility to choose a lot more different partners at cheaper rates. So, traditionally, what you'll see through kind of the COVID years is that there might be one or two carriers that stand out as dramatically cheaper in certain lanes than others. So, you're kind of pushed towards those one or two carriers, to where now there should be a much larger bucket of carriers that are kind of in that bottom cheaper side of things. So you can start to, pick and choose which carriers to go with rather than always choose the cheapest option. So we kind of see that on the shipper side, which, allows them to be, save some money on their line haul cost and potentially make more profit on that side of it. For the broker and carrier side of it, obviously using their historical information to price things out with a lot less volatility, it should equal more profit for them, but also allowing them to go out to new markets on shorter term rates and be more aggressive on those. So once again, taking the vibrations out of, hey, I don't want to go bid for an annual cycle on this lane if I might lose 6, 7, 8 months of the year. But now knowing that, hey, it's only a 6-month bid, let's go get aggressive and see if we can, put our best foot forward from a pricing standpoint, because the risk is not near as large as what it was before.
Yeah, no, great examples there. And I think, I like that, the fact that there's multiple data streams that come into play here. And I think it's when you aggregate all those three, I think what's different today than in the past is that both shippers and carriers and brokers have, much more transparency, much more visibility in terms of the market, in terms of performance, in terms of cost, to be able to make more, informed and intelligent decisions, particularly when it comes to procurement. We talk about profitability. Cost is always top of mind, but as we know, service is another key element of this. How does the service component weave into this whole process?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen from all the data sources that, tender acceptance on contract rates are much higher than what they were 6 months ago. So obviously that's usually the first thing shippers look at from a service standpoint. Are my carriers accepting the tenders that they're sending them? From a on-time percentage for pickup and delivery, those play major factors into it, but each shipper operates those differently. So some of them look at, if you're there by the minute from an appointment time, if it's within an hour, 2 hours, if it's that day, in theory, they get a little more flexibility as they have more carriers that can participate at, from a bidding cycle standpoint. But, the overall tender acceptance is kind of usually the keystone of kind of what shippers are looking at in order to, make their buying decisions, especially in markets like they are today.
Right. And I think, the other aspect I think that's important, going back to technology, what's different today is that, so you have much more visibility today, much more data today to make these types of decisions. And then obviously the technology to consume that data and be able to do optimization, be able to do analysis and so forth, and then to be able to execute in a much more efficient way than emailing a bunch of spreadsheets out. Obviously, I think the other component I think that's important is, and I'm a big proponent of the network model, is that I think shippers today and on the reverse side carriers, the fact that you've got these communities of connected trading partners, shippers and carriers on a common platform, the challenge has always been for shippers to connect to that long tail of carriers, which represents a significant, percentage of the market. And I think that's another component of this that's different today, is the fact that to be able to provide visibility and connectivity to a much larger base of carriers than companies have had historically in the past, right?
Yeah, that's really what our system's designed to do. So, we are a procurement layer, but we also have a marketplace of about 45,000 asset-based carriers that come in and participate as well. So, not only are we providing the procurement services to our shippers, but then allowing them to connect to carriers that might be outside of their network that they never knew existed, or potentially they've worked with once in the past, but it was through a brokerage or 3PL or 4PL that they never saw them again because, it depends on kind of where the contracts are going at that point in time. So, yes, there's a lot of technologies that are allowing shippers to make better buying decisions based off of introducing the new carriers, but also tying things together, like you mentioned earlier, of their service standards of, who exactly is this carrier, who works with them, how many partners do they have, are they more spot, or are they more contract, are they dedicated, being able to kind of fragment and segment those different types of carriers to bring the right ones to the shipper. So when they're going out for their annual RFP or seasonal RFP, they can make the right buying decisions.
Great. So Jake, as a way to wrap up then, I mean, the transportation, market will likely remain volatile in the weeks and months ahead. It's just the nature of the industry. So what action should companies take to effectively manage through this volatility in order to, again, achieve their transportation costs, capacity, and service goals?
Yeah, I think right now is a really good time to start looking at benchmarking and seeing kind of where they're paying current state compared to current markets. So especially ones that went for annual RFPs in Q3, Q4 of last year that might be 90 or 120 days into their contracts, taking a look at that and just seeing, which lanes are underperforming. And if they're underperforming and you're paying more than what market's going for, why not go run a mini bid or mini event to run those? So looking at the benchmarking piece of it, maybe expanding that to, generally speaking, spots down right now. So being able to look at some other types of mini bid features to potentially fill those voids for the small amount of spot they have, and try and even narrow that down more. And then, tying it kind of all together through systems like what we're offering here at Emerge in order to, build the proper route guide and then load that into their TMS and go from there.
Great. Yeah, no, great advice. I think benchmarking is one of those areas, again, that ties into, data, obviously. And I think the ability for companies to, better understand where they stand relative to, a broader market index or their peers in the industry, I think is a critical first step to really understanding, how well they're really doing, or where the opportunities for improvement truly are. So again, we just scratched the surface here, Jake. I think we could probably talk, for hours on this subject, but I think that you provided some great insights and advice on this topic. And, certainly an area that I'm sure that if we speak 6 months, 9 months from now, some of the key advice you provided are still going to hold true, but maybe the market will be different then. And there might be some other steps or other insights that might be worthwhile considering. So certainly, hopefully you'll be able to join us in a future episode.
Definitely looking forward to it. Really appreciate you having me on today.
Great. Well, I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Emerge website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Jake, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.
Definitely take care.